It just puts like what you're doing there. It
Yeah.
puts your camera view in a different spot on the screen.
Are you seeing any lag?
Um,
Are you seeing any lag now?
no,
Okay. Well, let's. Should we try it? It's theoretically recording at eight kilobits. So I think we decided it's a Zoom problem. Okay.
yeah,
Should we start?
start.
Hello, Dion.
Hey, Rich.
How's it
Nice
going?
Good. It's good to be back.
We have lots of technical problems. Sorry for that. We're learning a lot about how you can't actually bring a M1 Max to its knees.
Yeah, who would have thought?
I mean, how is that even possible that you could actually bring down a 64 gigabyte machine, yada, yada, yada? But I managed to do it. Well, as you know from the last show, we had horrible, horrible lag. So I hope this will be better. And I've just learned a lot about screen setup. So hopefully this looks good. Does everyone like our backgrounds? Should we show some of the other ones to impress people?
Yeah,
All right. Let's
let's
see
do
if
it.
this works. Oh, Pong. Yeah, let's see if this works. Oh, yes. Look, our first podcast. Isn't that beautiful? Look, and we can theoretically scroll. So now we can talk about things and people can see the URL. Oh, I like that one. That looks like Dion. There we
Nice.
go. And then what else we have here? Oh, look at this one. I've actually never done
Yeah,
this search. Is this going to result?
technical problems. It's part of our daily lives.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. We'll never get rid of those problems. Oh, I see. I have a little problem here. So you're gonna the viewers are actually going to see live editing of our windows. There we go. Because we don't have Dion in the right place. There he is. He looks so pretty now. Dion has no idea what I'm doing, but believe me, it looks a lot better. Okay, Dion, back to it.
Back to it. Okay, so as most of the people who's listening, I mean, not everyone might know us, but it's good to mention like why we're doing this again. So, Rich and we have a little stealth startup, and we decided to set up this podcast series just to talk through our thinking, and in a couple of years from now, to have the opportunity to look back and laugh at ourselves. And the topics that we like to cover here is everything from fundraising to how do you think about your technology strategy. It's everything to do with setting up a tech startup and getting that out the door. And what I would like to dig into today is discussing fundraising and how a startup founder should think about venture capital, especially in these times where we've seen the fundraising climate change quite dramatically from before the pandemic to today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. This is a great topic that we should talk about. And as I adjust the feedback volume of my microphone, what should we talk about? I mean, obviously the fundraising climate went from, let's say, hot to frigid, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely frigid. And it's something that's always been interesting for me. If I look at the fundraising climate, let's say, before the pandemic, if you compare Europe to North America, at least, okay, I can't speak for the entire Europe, but I'm in Holland and I've had a couple of startups in Holland before. And it always struck me that there's such a big difference. In the Netherlands, it's very, very hard to get seed capital, large amounts of seed capital. I'm talking about above 500,000. It's fairly easy to get small grants, and there's a lot of like startup grants and government types of grants, but you're typically talking 50 to maybe 100K, maybe if you're lucky, 250K. So that's really hard. And then it's fairly easy once you have customers and you can show traction to raise in Europe. But that chasm in between, so you need that cash injection so you could build your product, but you can't get enough. How do you survive that gap? And if you're a startup founder today, and with so little risky capital that's available, how do you approach that?
It must be just impossible. I mean, my God, goodness, I can't imagine not needing some money to get started. That's more than just what's in your checkbook. So
Mm.
it sounds like it's much harder for European startups to sort of get that early product signal, if you will, because in the U.S. there's just so many opportunities from angel investors to incubators to get there. Y Combinator, for instance, is the classic example of filling that gap.
Yeah, and I would say in Europe we have the equivalent of Y Combinator, etc. It's just that the investment round is just really small. So it's hard. It's if you can bootstrap long enough and you can live with your parents, then you can maybe get by. But if you're in the business of needing, let's say, 1 million in seed funding because what you're building just requires, let's say, a lot of hardware investment, for example, then it's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, no, that sounds really tough. I mean, I think part of it is, success begets success. So there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are excited about helping little companies. Personally, I'm on no less than one, two, three, four different angel groups that are doing small investment at that scale. And I think that is sort of a big secret for the success, if you will, of these early schemes. Because a lot of times it's not the getting the 50 million or the 10 million even, it's getting the bootstrap that you really got product signal. So yeah, I don't know how I don't know how that works.
Mm. Yeah, it's really challenging. At least what I see, what folks in Holland try and do is they'll typically join an incubator. We have a pretty nice one in the close to the European Space Agency that offers you around 50K per year. It's not a convertible loan or anything. It's part of the space agency's investment into the startup ecosystem. And you can access that capital. They give you access to business mentors and a little office space that you can rent. And that can keep you afloat for 2 years, which should be enough time to at least get some strategic partnerships and customers in place. But you need to be very careful with your money.
I don't know how you hire a team with that amount of money. I mean, it just seems like so little to really get started.
It is very, very little. And then what friends of mine typically do in that situation, they either work part-time and so they don't have to eat into the burn rate too much. And then very slowly you can transition into the company, but based off of revenue. So it's a more risk adverse approach. But I guess if you can crack that, then you really have a proper business, right? Because you get revenue in the door and you can stand on your own feet instead of relying on venture capital all the time.
Yeah, when I reflect on our experience here, it's sort of unfair, right? Because we were able to get capital. We could spend the year or two full time getting 4 or 5 people together to do it. It's much harder in Holland and in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And what does the process look down the road? So after you've raised your initial seed round, when is the next step to decide, okay, I need to raise a Series A? What is that threshold?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's sort of the magic, isn't it? I mean, I think it's really hard to judge that. I think everyone has their own preferences. I tend to be someone who doesn't like to take too many risks or really risk people's time or money. So I think, for us, we've been very conservative. So we raised the small seed round that then became a big seed round. And now we're sort of thinking about the next raise where we're really looking for customers. So I think there is I think of it smile and dial approach. And there are a lot of startups who do this where literally you get a list of 1,000 people and you just keep calling until you get somebody. And that can be a very successful strategy, particularly in the U.S., which is long and deep. I think there are other companies that are much more targeted, and I think that's what we're trying to build, where we have customers, we feel like it's a good investment, and you're not trying to convince anybody of anything. But you need to have the runway to do that. So either that's the luxury of a good benefactor, a good angel, or the sort of being in a hot category, which is really hard to predict.
Right. And how do you know what is a good angel? And are all venture capitalists the same, or um, is are some investors better for your business in the long run than others?
Well, I think this is the sometimes, I was venture capitalist for 15 years, right? And I sometimes think that there are like two kingdoms of plants in the venture capital world. One kingdom is the hot deal kingdom, where you're essentially fighting off people. You're trying not to take too much capital and get too diluted. Typically, you have a great track record or a good idea, and it's sort of a Midas touch. That is usually where the tier one venture capitalists play. And now it's sort of unfair because that's also where all the good people go. I just read about a company called, I can't remember. It's raised almost $130 million in capital without a product. Bunch of ex-Apple guys. It just did another round at $1 billion pre, and there's no product. And now I've actually never lived in that world. I mean, it would be so great to be able to live in that world. But I think that is what people, when they think about venture capital, that's what they want to be. Sort of like if you're going to be a movie star, you want to be someone famous, right? You want to be The Rock. You don't want to be someone on off Broadway. The problem is 99% of the people are actually the other kind, which is you're not famous. No one's going to give you $130 million for nothing. And that's the long, slow, hard grind.
This is such an important topic you raised, because I think a lot of startup founders, they look at, the news. You see TechCrunch and you see Wired, and you see people raising these astronomical amounts. And then you kind of think, but that's what it should be like, this is normal. You go out, you raise $10 million in your Series A, and you're off to the races because you've already had like 5 million in seed. But that's not really the case, right? That's the 1% that catches the headlines, maybe, that we're being fed.
Well, I think you look as handsome, as beautiful as Kim Kardashian, Dion. I think you're perfectly in that category, don't you?
Of course.
Yeah, no, I think that's the problem. Is everyone wants to be that sort of the famous person. It seems so easy, but for 99.99% of all the startups, is that true? By the way, do you know how many startups there are in Silicon Valley?
How many?
Well, it turns out no one knows how many startups there are in Silicon Valley, but the estimate is probably 30 to 40,000. And then there's probably, 100 unicorns there. So do the math.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the best advice I give people is, know who you are. You should look down and see whether you're The Rock or Kim Kardashian. That should be fairly evident by the number of Facebook followers you have or Twitter followers. And if you're not in that category of having millions of followers and being invited to, and by the way, the other way to tell is, are you invited to famous conferences to be keynote speakers? So if you are invited to the Paul Allen, some famous thing, then you're famous. So I'm sure that happens to you all the time. You get invited all the time to host the Academy Awards.
All the time. I mean, this is just old hat for me. Do it regularly. But when it comes to selecting a venture capitalist to make this investment, right? So you can either just go for money. It's hard, right? First up, it's hard just to get someone on the line and to agree to have a conversation with you. Never mind actually getting a term sheet in front of you. But do you typically look only for money, or do you look for something else in that relationship? In terms of, maybe an investor that understands the market you're going into, that has other investments there that can help you along. What's the type of support that you typically look for when it comes to your investment partners?
Well, Dion, I have a really different approach to raising money. So this is not going to be for everybody, but at least for me, I think venture capitalists no different than I think about customers. So remember, venture capitalists are in the business of buying a product, which is you, and making money from it. So in many senses, the ask what they want and give it to them philosophy actually does work. I think you've seen this philosophy for the last 2 years, but it's never bad to say to a venture capitalist, I'm in category X. Let's say I want to do video conferencing. And the thing you need to remember is professional investors have a thesis for every category. They have to write investment memos. They have to convince their bosses. We'll talk about that in a second. They have to convince their bosses that you are deserving of the, in a typical venture capital firm, they'll have 10 shots on goal a year. So 10 new investments a year. Dion, do you have any idea how many deals a typical one venture capitalist looks at every year?
It's probably thousands, I would guess.
I actually spent some time and calculated it. For me, it was 2,000 deals. In a typical firm with 3 partners, just to go through the math, you do 10 deals a year. That means you get three deals per partner in general. So your chances of getting across the line with any one partner is literally 0.1%. So what that means is their filters are on high. And now here's the amazing part. Venture capitalists know exactly what they're looking for, but most 99.99% of all people who are trying to raise money never ask them.
Mm. Mm.
So, we can do a little role play. So, Dion, welcome. I'm a venture capitalist. What are you going to talk about today?
Okay, this is a great role-playing exercise because before this this call, I would have said, the typical thing. So you show them your deck and you try to dazzle them with your product offering and show them, how you create value and you solve a problem, all of that goodness. But I guess I need to change that approach slightly and saying that, maybe, I'm coming into this conversation knowing the market that I want to go after. But to your point, ask them and just give them, what they're asking for. So maybe I should respond with a question instead and saying, like, it's great to meet you, Rich. What do you guys typically invest in? What are you looking for to make your firm successful? And we can see if there's some common ground before I even start to talk.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think there are 2 key questions you ask in the beginning. Number one is, in essence, are you open for business? Which is usually, how are things going? How's the climate going? What are you looking for? And then you'll hear things like, no, we're staying away from early seed deals. We're just we have a lot of dry powder and we're focused on later stage. Now, this is one difference between venture capitalists and most other customers. They will tell you exactly what they're doing. Most venture capitalists will tell you exactly what their strategy is because they so desperately want you to be the billion-dollar success that's going to make them successful. So it's completely open kimono, right? Then the second question I like to ask is, let's suppose we're doing a construction vertical company, right? You just say, so what do you think about construction? Is it a good category? And amazingly, they will tell you exactly what they think. Doing the role play, they would say something like, construction could be a pretty good category, but I'm worried about the recession. And it's typically a very slow-moving industry with a lot of small players, and it's hard to get scale, right? Now you've actually heard, and I think when you're doing a presentation, you should always have someone taking detailed notes because it's hard to listen and talk at the same time. But here's what I heard. Oh, don't like the market. You need to have a strategy for turning small to big, and it's slow-moving. So you need to explain why you're in a fast-moving sector. You've actually gotten a lot of data just from that, right? Then the third question I like to ask is, so what deals have you done in that area? And amazingly, they will tell you exactly what they're doing. Oh yeah, we're doing company A. They've done pretty well in this category by doing some magical thing X, Y, and Z. Venture capitalists like to talk about their successes. Write down the X, Y, and Z. So for instance, I really like this construction management system because they're only doing software and they're mainly focused on mid-sized players, which are not too bureaucratic and have enough scale. Okay, you have enough to do your presentation now. So here's what I would say. Instead of doing the whole pitch, you could, well, we are very focused on, just an example, they want to do early stage. We're very focused not on early stage, but on getting a few players so we can quickly get to the medium scale. So you're kind of avoiding the early stage thing. Then you would say something like, and our focus is just like you. We think the same thing about the construction business. And our focus is on mid-scale companies, and just repeat what he said. Right? And this means that you have to have it's very hard to do the pitch right, but you got to be very flexible and be able to switch your pitch up depending on this. I typically try to think about the 3 things that he told me that were the most important and try to hit those 3. And it's never. I have a friend named Jerry Weissman who's a master presentation, and it's very good to repeat and say, "Oh, here's what I think I heard. You're mainly doing later stage, more sure bets. You are not sure about construction as a category, but are interested in mid-sized companies, and you are looking for things with early revenue traction." I'm just making those things up. And now I'm going to tell you about those three things and make sure you cover those three things off. So in some ways, a good venture capital pitch actually completely inverts to just answering the customer's problems. And you want to think about the slide deck as a explanation point, and you may not cover 90% of your slides. Make sense?
This is such good. This is a really good insights, and for everyone who's listening, I've seen Rich in action with this a couple of times, and what I found really useful is during the call when you're having a discussion, either with your investors or with a potential partner, a strategic partner, where there's someone that just takes a lot of notes, write down everything in the conversation. My wife is heading a genetics startup at the moment. And she asks if she could run a transcription plugin in Zoom that transcribes the meeting. But the downside is that she can't in real time adjust her pitch. But it's a good technique to start off with. So you really make sure you listen to your investor the same way you listen to a customer, and you offer to them what they're asking for, because you're getting a lot of insight on the market basically for free. It's a lot of high quality market research you're getting from that phone call if you're prepared to listen and ask questions, and if you want to give them value instead of just asking for money and just pitching your idea.
Totally true. And I think let's face it, this is very hard to do, and it only works one-on-one. It doesn't, there's this classic 30-second elevator pitch to Y Combinator thing. This doesn't work for that. This is really designed just for, I'm in a one-on-one, I'm really hearing what people need. By the way, I like to do a lot of those meetings before I do the Y Combinator 50,000 investor pitch deck, because what you're going to find is it's going to be very common, right? You know a pitch is good when you know exactly what that person's going to say, because the other thing is venture capitalists are herd animals, right? Because they pay. Remember, venture capitalists get rewarded by being above the curve. What that means is the cattle that wanders off the range and looks for something is not as good as just being slightly ahead of the other buffalo, right? So you find much commonality in thinking, and understanding that's very important. I just want to also comment that one of the ways to do this is to use the Sequoia pitch deck as the way to have a good base of slides, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But the other thing is, you as the speaker, you just need to write down the three things you want. The job of the other person is to transcribe the whole thing for later. A lot of people don't like the transcription thing, but the job of the speaker is pretty hard, because you have to hear those 3 points and say, here's what they are. Now, we have a trick in Zoomland, right? In that we have an off-channel WhatsApp session running simultaneously where we can have this discussion. So a lot of times I'll hear from John or from you, hey, talk about this. So that's a little bit of a treat in Zoom world that you can do that you can't do in the real world. But I would highly recommend that you practice this with just a regular human, because it takes a lot of practice. As you know, we did a presentation this week and I completely flubbed it, because it's not natural to talk this way. You're so desperate to give the pitch, right? And I think that's really the problem with it. But if you're interested, this Sequoia pitch deck is actually very good. Just type in Sequoia pitch deck, and it actually is the template that I use, and it's essentially your mission, what problem you're trying to solve, what solution, why now, what's the market size, what's the competition. And what you should think of this as not a linear deck. This is what you're going to pick through when you do the presentation. One of the big tricks here, just technically speaking, is this is where Google Slides is so excellent, or PowerPoint slideshow mode, because it lets you show something on the screen to Zoom, and also you can pick through the slides that you want. So a good pitchmeister knows all the slides and knows exactly where he's going to go, because typically he or she's going to have heard the construction is not a foo, and no, I need to go to slide here, slide here, slide here, and that's how you get good at it, because repetition is the key.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I've also found that Guy Kawasaki or Guy Kawasaki. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. He has also a very nice 10 slide pitch deck format that I've always loved to use in the past. And I find that really sharpens the pencil on your thinking around your business proposition, and it makes you think about the entire company. It makes you think about the problem you're solving. It makes you think about how you're solving it and why now. All of those good things that I want to dig into with you in a next episode.
I think that's great. We should definitely do that. I just want to emphasize, I think the most critical thing in this whole thing is the problem, like a real customer problem, how it makes him or her or them more money, and then why is the market changing. These are actually the 3 key slides that tend to evolve a lot. But this has been great, Dion. I think we got a fairly basic podcast out, and hopefully it looks good. On to next week, don't you think?
Yes, hopefully people don't bleed from the ears when they listen to this, and we will keep on improving as good little startup founders. So I hope that this has been fun for whoever else is listening to this.
Oh, come on. We got 15 views last week. Come on, man. Nearly triple. Hey. See you soon, Dion.
See you.